Chapter 9:11. The noodles in her hand fell to the ground, and his kiss deepened. When the elevator door opened, he carried her and kissed her to the door of her apartment. He pressed against her and said in a warm voice, "Give me the key card." Pei Chi looked up and touched the card with her little hands. Finally, she found the key card. But she couldn't swipe it. Tang Yu murmured in pain, "Go back to the car." Pei Chi was a little more clear-headed. Only then did she remember that the key card belonged to Lao Can, and hers was in her bag. Biting her lip, she said with tears in her eyes, "I'll get it from Lao Kansas." Her legs were a little weak. She walked over and swiped the key card to Lao Can's apartment. Tang Yu was very concerned about his woman having another man's key card. He coughed lightly. "He won't have yours too, will he?" Pei Chi nodded, not knowing that Tang Yu's face was dark behind her. Why did he turn off the lights? She was a little surprised. The lights were on when she left. After turning on the lights, she wanted to signal Tang Yu to wait outside. However, when the lights were on, she saw Lao Can and Pei Huan playing happily in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. They were doing difficult lifts, and they were both naked. When she saw Pei Chi, Pei Huan screamed, "Pei Chi, didn't you go back to your apartment?" She covered her face and saw Tang Yu behind Pei Chi through the gaps between her fingers. She wanted to hide in a hole and be done with it. Lao Can had strong bronze muscles, and his mouth was full of xiong hair. He looked like he was full of hormones. Tang Yu rubbed his nose and retreated to wait for his woman. In his heart, he was wondering if his Chi would like a man with xiong fur. In order to save Pei Huan's face, Pei Chi closed the door first and then threw Lao Can's keycard to Pei Huan. "Here, you can act without worry in the future." Pei Huan was happy, but she was still worried. "Chi, but what about our meal? Shouldn't you learn to be my woman?" Old Can grabbed a shirt and wrapped it around Pei Huan while he put on a pair of shorts. In order to please him, Pei Huan immediately said that she would learn it. But later on, experiments proved that Pei Huan could not learn it even after studying for 20 years. Later on, when she got pregnant, Old Can learned how to cater to her picky stomach and improved his cooking skills to be as good as his photography skills. "Go inside and wash up. Lie down and wait for me." Old Can patted Pei Huan and said straightforwardly. Pei Huan immediately ran into the bedroom like a happy little wolf dog. Before she left, she even licked her lips and stared at Old Can's meat bone, in a charming manner. "Hurry up." Pei Chi was stunned. She looked at Lao Can and said, "I don't remember you having a sweet tooth." Old Can lit a cigarette and held it between his fingers. There was a touch of deep thought in his eyes. He was completely different from the impulsive man who wanted Pei Huan just now. He liked Pei Huan, but at the same time, he also treated Pei Chi as his little sister. After a while, he asked indifferently, "Have you thought it through?" Pei Chi knew what he was asking, so she nodded and said, "Yes, I have." Old Can glanced in the direction of the door and smiled. Not bad. A man who did it 5 times a night couldn't be wrong. He kept thinking that the man in City H that night should be Tang Yu. Old Can opened the door and leaned against the door to look at Tang Yu. He pointed at Pei Chi and said in a fierce tone, "This is my disciple, Pei Chi. If you dare to bully her one day, I will beat you up." Chapter 9:12. Tang Yu smiled bitterly. At the same time, he was touched. When he was not around, his Chi came back to life because she met Old Kansas. Although he was sad that her change was not because of him, he was indeed grateful to Old Kansas. He thanked him very seriously. Old Can went forward and patted his shoulder. "We'll wait for you to get married together." Tang Yu said solemnly, "Chi and I are husband and wife. So you and Pei Huan don't have to wait. Get married immediately. I'll be at ease this way. Old Can raised an eyebrow. Aren't you and that girl divorced? Old Can, that's heart-wrenching. Tang Yu's expression was as if he hadn't made any noises for 3 days. It was very interesting. Old Can gave Pei Chi a push. All right, you spineless girl, I'll give her to you. Remember not to eat her up. Before closing the door, Old Can said shamelessly for Pei Huan's sake, remember to make breakfast tomorrow. After the door was closed, Tang Yu stared at his door for a long time. Pei Chi swiped her phone to open her apartment and picked up the noodles. Tang Yu, the noodles are all burnt. Then I'll make it later. He came back to his senses, closed the door, and gently pulled off his tie. Pei Chi was a little afraid of this action of his. During the 3 days in America, he had tied her up with a tie in order to make her listen to him. Tang Yu smiled. I'll go take a shower first. He walked into her bedroom as he said this. He looked very natural, as if he was half the owner of the place. Pei Chi looked at him eagerly. Actually, she felt like she was cursing inside. Wasn't he, in a hurry? She had to admit that Tang Yu was very good at seducing Pei Chi. He knew how to keep her in suspense. He took off his clothes in her bedroom and took a simple shower. He only wrapped a bath towel around his waist, the water droplets on the ends of his black hair rolled down his cheeks, then onto his firm chest and lower abdomen. Finally, they rolled into the narrow bath towel, causing one to think deeply. Pei Chi stood at the door and looked at the invincible man. Tang Yu threw a towel to her and said, "Dry my hair for me." There was an imperceptible hoarseness in his voice. She nodded and walked over, but he was already leaning against the headboard, casually flipping through a magazine. Pei Chi carefully knelt beside him and gently wiped the water off his hair. He flipped through the magazine, his expression calm. "Aren't you hungry?" Pei Chi looked at the time. It was already 9:30. Tang Yu put the magazine aside and carried her over. He said lightly, "Do it twice before you eat." Do it twice. He wanted to kiss her, but she quickly placed her hand on his mouth and said in a low voice, "Tang Yu, I want to know what the child looks like. Is she okay?" Tang Yu's movements paused, his gaze deep into her eyes. Pei Chi looked serious and a little uneasy. He looked at her for a while and smiled. "Chi, do you really want to know?" "Yeah." Her voice was like a little lamb, and her body moved up. "Tang Yu, I promise I won't look for her, okay?" Because of her movement, Mr. Tang closed his eyes and let out a muffled groan. Pei Chi didn't notice his strangeness. She put her hands on his shoulders and looked at him eagerly. Tang Yu's fingers gently stroked her delicate little face. His fingers moved back, and her long black hair fell down. She heard him say, "Chi, please me." Chapter 9:13. However, he still refused to show her the baby's photo even though he was comfortable and enjoying it. Pei Chi's long hair was scattered and wrapped around his body. She bit him angrily. "Tang Yu, you didn't keep your promise." He chuckled and caressed the little thing in his arms. "Chi, you were the one who fell for it on purpose." He whispered in her ear, "You wanted to do that to me a long time ago, didn't you?" "I don't have such a hobby." She blushed and turned her back. She was extremely angry, she had even used her little hands and mouth, but he was acting shamelessly. Tang Yu hugged her from behind and kissed her little neck. "Chi, go down and do it for me." "I don't want to." She was acting shamelessly in front of him. Tang Yu was a little helpless. "Chi." She pursed her lips. "I don't want to." He looked at her angry little face and hugged her with a smile. Ignoring her punches and kicks, he carried her to the kitchen. "There are no ingredients." She looked at him angrily. Tang Yu hugged her from behind and buried his face in her fragrant little neck. He nibbled gently. If there are no ingredients, I'll eat you, She could only do it for him obediently. She only had a big t-shirt on, which was loose, so it was convenient for him to touch her. Is it dirty? She turned her head and glanced at him. Her eyes were sparkling, and it was indescribably seductive. In a moment of passion, he hooked her little head over and kissed her for a long time. His big hands were getting more and more excessive. When he was satisfied, he then whispered in her ear, I've kissed you even if it's dirty. I'm ignoring you. She turned around and continued to do it. Tang Yu's slender body trapped her from behind. He was over 1.8 meters tall, and she was as petite as a child in his arms. His lips were close to her ear, and he said in a low voice, Chi-Chi, when you were eating just now, you didn't think it was dirty. Pei Chi-Chi couldn't bear to listen to him anymore. He had taken advantage of her and yet he was still pretending to be obedient. Who had tricked her into eating it? She continued to ignore him, placed the noodles on the small dining table, and went to brush her teeth. Tang Yu didn't make things difficult for her anymore. He ate the noodles, washed the dishes, and smoked 2 cigarettes on the balcony before returning to the bedroom. Pei Chi-Chi was asleep, her back facing him. Still angry. He smiled silently and lay down on his side. His lips were on her little neck as he whispered, Pei Chi-Chi, how about I serve you as well? It was not that he had never done something like this before, but his Chi-Chi was a very shy little thing. Whenever he did that, she would not be able to hold on for long and would clamor for it to end. Pei Chi-Chi's voice was still gloomy. No way. He laughed lowly. Then what do you want? Sleep. She turned over and nestled her small body in his arms. She hugged his waist and said shamelessly, don't do it, okay? She had not recovered from the 3 days in America, and now that he was here again, she really couldn't take it. Tang Yu hugged her, looking a little uncomfortable. After a long time, he hugged her and asked her softly, Chi-Chi, am I out of practice? Are you not feeling well? This kind of question. Pei Chi-Chi's little face was completely red. She didn't say anything and just buried her face in his arms. Tang Yu lowered his head and kissed her little mouth. His voice was even deeper. Chi-Chi. She snorted softly. No, she meowed like a kitten. Too much. Tang Yu was stunned for a moment before he realized it. He seriously reflected on whether his needs were too strong. Chapter 9:14. Pei Chi-Chi heaved a sigh of relief. Tang Yu said considerately, I'll do it myself. She almost cried. How could she fall asleep when he did all these things to her? Because she didn't know when the next time would be, Tang Yu kept pestering her until the second half of the night. Pei Chi-Chi vaguely thought that she shouldn't pity old Can's kidneys, but herself. At the same time, she was quite impressed by Pei Huan's stamina. That petite body was really durable. As a result, when he woke up at 8 in the morning, his head was still groggy. She reached out to turn off the alarm clock and closed her eyes for a while before she remembered to get up. Tang Yu hugged her and woke up too. After all, he had slept with her for the whole night. His voice was a little hoarse. I'll go. Pei Chi-Chi was a little surprised. Tang Yu had already gotten up, dressed in long pants and a shirt, and was nestled in her kitchen. Pei Chi-Chi lay straight for a while and decided to let him be. Pei Huan and old Can woke up at 9. She had a job at 11, otherwise she would have slept until the afternoon. Yawning, he walked to Pei Chi-Chi's small dining room and sat down to wait for breakfast. She hadn't woken up yet. She held her forehead and called out to Pei Chi-Chi softly. Pei Chi-Chi came out of the bedroom and Pei Huan's eyes widened. Chi-Chi, you woke up so late. Wouldn't her breakfast be ruined? Pei Chi-Chi greeted Old Can and sat down to wait for breakfast with Pei Huan. Old Can too. The three of them looked at each other. What about the last one? Could it be? Pei Huan was in disbelief. She turned to look at the kitchen and saw Tang Yu standing there, his slender and handsome figure. Pei Huan was a little infatuated and stared at him. He was so good-looking. Pei Huan admitted that she was a little infatuated, but she just admired him for a while. Old Can sneered. Pei Huan, go pack your luggage after breakfast. Pei Huan's gaze was still on the slender figure in the kitchen. She casually replied, why? Old Can continued to sneer without saying a word. It took Pei Huan about 10 seconds to realize what was going on, and a chill crept up her back. Old Can was angry. Moreover, she was angry because of jealousy. He quickly sat up straight and tried to please her. I'm just looking. It's the same as you men staring at beautiful women. Old Can sneered, I don't like to stare at pretty girls. Pei Huan was speechless. Old Can's expression was cold. Pei Huan, marriage is not a game. If you can't be sure, then let's go. Disbanded. Pei Huan blinked for a while, wiping away the moisture in her eyes. After a while, she raised her head. All right, Can Mingzhu. So be it. I know you can't forget that old woman, Su Mo. You call her name even in your dreams. Pei Huan said and stood up. I'll help you and that old woman grow old together. You won't have to live with her for the rest of your life. The veins on Old Can's forehead were popping. He narrowed his eyes and glared at her. She was being unreasonable. His eyes widened to the size of bells. Be reasonable. When did I ever dream of her? Of course you don't know what you said last night. Pei Huan was a little angry. Spend the rest of your life with that old woman. Can Mingzhu, you can go confess to her and see if your goddess will care about you or sleep with those men. Before she could finish, she received a slap on her face. Chapter 9:15. Old Can really liked Pei Huan and really wanted to live with her. He had only said those words out of anger and jealousy. However, what Pei Huan said about Su Mo was a little too much, and Old Can couldn't stand it. But he immediately regretted slapping her. His hand was as big as a fan, thick and rough. Her face must be hurting, right? He looked over and saw that Pei Huan's face was half swollen. Old Can's heart instantly ached, and he sounded a little uncomfortable. Does it hurt? He reached out, wanting to touch her. Pei Huan shrank back, and there was a tinge of hurt in her eyes. He still cared about Su Mo. It was true that he called out Su Mo's name at night. It wasn't that she didn't care, but she chose to tolerate it because she knew that she was useless and wasn't as capable as Su Mo, who was doing so well in the industry. However, Old Can had hit her just because of Su Mo, just when they had agreed to get married. Pei Huan lifted her head and sneered at Old Kansas, you don't need to chase me away. I can leave on my own. Can Mingzhu, it's my fault for holding you back. I thought that you liked me because you saved me, but I was being presumptuous. She forced back her tears, and there was a look of determination on her face. Whoever looks for me in the future is a bastard. Her arm was caught. She knew that it was Old Can, and she didn't want to see him. She twisted her face. Bastard, get lost. Don't touch me. Go and touch your white moonlight. Go and touch your dream girl. He wouldn't let go. Pei Huan pushed him away forcefully, and said in a shrill voice, Can Mingzhu, have you never seen a woman before? Or is it that all women other than Su Mo are the same in your heart? They're all just passageways, right? Old Can's eyeballs were about to pop out, and his nostrils flared. He looked terrifying. After a long while, he finally said, "Pei Huan, you know that's not the case." Pei Huan chuckled. "Isn't it? Kunmingzhu, do you think I'm a fool?" She looked down at his hand that was grabbing her, and said softly, "Let go." Old Kun couldn't bear to let go, and she left the moment he let go. He did not know if he had called Su Mo's name during the night. If he had, it must have been out of habit. This lass had been following him around like a puppy just a while ago, wishing that he was her master. But now, she had turned her back on him just like that. Pei Huan chuckled. "Do you think I'm capricious? Kunmingzhu, you were the one who told me to scram first. No matter how useless I, Pei Huan, am, I will not rely on an old man like you." As she spoke, she stepped on his foot and ran to the opposite door to pack her luggage. The pitiful Xiao Mei helped her move it over last night. Old Kun chased after him. Tang Yu came out of the kitchen and made a Chinese-style breakfast. Surprisingly, it was quite decent. He looked at the door. "Are they okay?" Pei Chi buried her head in her breakfast and said calmly, "It's fine. I can guarantee that old Can will throw Pei Huan on the bed later. There's nothing between them that can't be solved with their bodies." Tang Yu sat beside her. Even though he had just made breakfast, he still looked noble. He raised an eyebrow. Pei Chi looked up and coughed lightly. "If the first time doesn't work, I'll do it twice." Before breakfast, Mr. Tang said, "Chi, are you reminding me that I'll do the same thing if you get angry in the future?" He looked at her very seriously and asked, "Chi, how many times do you want it to be?" "I'll try my best to cooperate." Chapter 9:16. Pei Huan ran to the opposite side and packed her clothes frantically. Old Kun kicked the door open. The little wolf had already packed her clothes and was about to leave with the small suitcase. Old Can's head hurt a little. She looked at the suitcase that wasn't even zipped properly, revealing half of her asterisk. How did she survive until now? He glared at her. "Are you really leaving?" Pei Huan raised her head and tried hard not to cry. He was just a man. She still had this bit of backbone. "That's right," he said decisively. Old Kun took a step back and leaned against the side. He stared at her with a burning gaze. "You're not coming back?" "Yes." She was still firm. Old Can's eyebrows twitched and she rubbed the space between her eyebrows. "I'm going to book a house this afternoon." "That's great. You happen to be living with that old woman, Su Mo," Pei Huan said viciously. "You can kneel in front of her and beg. Maybe she'll be touched." Old Can's veins popped again. "Pei Huan, don't go too far." "Fine, I'm leaving. I won't hinder the marriage of the great scholar Can and talented Lady Su. I'm shallow. I stare at good-looking men. I don't fucking think about men at night and call out people's names in my sleep." Pei Huan sneered. "Goodbye." She then pulled the suitcase and walked out. Along the way, tears flowed down her cheeks. However, she didn't care about it. She cried silently and opened the door to leave. Old Kun pulled her back and his voice softened a little. "Are you really leaving?" Pei Huan didn't look back. She held the suitcase so tightly that her fingertips turned white. She looked down at her toes and said in a low voice, "Kunmingzhu, I like you very much. But it doesn't mean that I'll give in to you unconditionally. I've said that we have to be clean, not just physically, but also in our hearts." She paused for a moment and said, "I saw Lin Jinrong yesterday. I liked him and loved him. It's not that I didn't feel anything, but I put you first. I've completely let it go. But what about you? Do you dare to say that you intend to drive Su Mo out of your heart?" Do you dare to say that every time after we've done it, you would hug me and reminisce about the times you and that old woman used to be in bed? As Pei Huan spoke, she began to cry again. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand and said fiercely, "That's it. You continue to be infatuated with your love, I'll look for my man." Her words made Lao Can's heart extremely uncomfortable. In his heart, Pei Huan had always been superficial. He didn't hate her superficiality. On the contrary, she was very cute. He knew that she passionately liked him, and he also liked her. But only now did he understand that Pei Huan's love for him and his love for her were different. What she wanted was far more than what he was willing to give. He grabbed her arm and refused to let go. Pei Huan's voice was low as she said, "Can Mingzhu, look, just one sentence and we can be like this on the battlefield. I don't want to be like this for many years to come." She sobbed uncontrollably, because from that moment on, she wanted to regain her dignity as a woman. There was once a man who didn't love her, and she stubbornly chose to take revenge. But Lao Can didn't love her, and she chose to let him be. He didn't let go, and she got angry. She threw the entire suitcase at his feet and howled. Pei Huan's face was full of tears as she cried, "Can Mingzhu, I'll let you be with that old woman, all right? Let go of me. Do you want to find a woman to spend money on?" Chapter 9:17. Pei Huan was throwing a tantrum because she wanted more. He breathed softly and looked at the little woman who was crying in front of him. His rough fingers wiped away her tears. Pei Huan turned her face away to avoid his touch and wanted to leave again. Old Can hugged her and pressed her into his beast-like arms. His voice was gentle like never before. "Are you really leaving?" Pei Huan pushed him, but he didn't budge. Old Can pressed her down. "You won't be able to enjoy my service after you leave." He moved his face away slightly and stared into her eyes. "Don't you like it when I kiss you and say that my tongue brush is better than that thing?" Pei Huan wanted to scold him, but she bit her tongue the moment she opened her mouth. She stared at him with tears in her eyes. Old Can's expression became gentler, and so did his voice. "Huan, let's not talk about this anymore, okay?" He looked a little uncomfortable. "If you don't mention that old woman, I won't think about her. If you mention it, I dare to think about her." Pei Huan's eyes widened in disbelief. Old Can actually said, "Old woman." She looked really cute. Old Can picked her up and carried her to the bedroom, regardless of her struggle. "You're crying so sadly. Let me comfort you." The door was violently kicked shut, and then Pei Huan was comforted by Little Steel. While being comforted, she cried and scolded, "Can Mingzhu, you pervert." Pei Chi finished her breakfast calmly, but Tang Yu was a little doubtful. They quarreled so fiercely just now. Would Old Can and Pei Huan make up? But when he left, he happened to see Pei Huan going out to catch up with her work. Old Can was wearing a pair of sunglasses and looked very cool. But at this time, Pei Huan had turned into a little wolf dog again. Tang Yu was silent. Pei Huan was much easier to coax than Pei Chi. In the afternoon, Old Can took Pei Huan to book a room. It was a small and cute 3-story villa in the suburbs of B City. Pei Huan liked it very much. She and Old Can got used to each other's temperament during the quarrel and rolling in the sheets. They also understood each other's temperament and no longer touched each other's bottom line. Their relationship gradually stabilized. Pei Chi went to the magazine office to cancel her leave. The chief editor patted her on the shoulder happily and said earnestly, "Little Pei, you're a good person." The higher-ups are especially optimistic about one this time. They said that they're going to work hard on the cover and make it a hit. Pei Chi mumbled, "Chief editor, why don't you just do a photo shoot? Make it as loud as you want it to be." "Little Pei, what are you talking about?" The managing editor couldn't believe his ears. Xiao Pei was a virtuous lady. How could she say such crude words? Pei Chi looked innocent. I didn't say anything. The editor-in-chief chose to ignore it. After all, the other party was a South African star. He coughed lightly. Anyway, this time, we must crush that unsophisticated and tacky man. This kind of magazine with no integrity can never be compared to our magazine. When Pei Chi left, he scratched his head, success in one go. Let Tang Yu reveal a little. The shoot was done in Tang Yu's office. Pei Chi specially invited Old Kansas. In the beginning, Tang Yu was against it. He only wanted Pei Chi to do the shoot, but he was persuaded in the end. Tang Yu was dressed in a beige suit. He sat on the sofa in front of the French windows. In his hand was a cup of Mantagnine, which Xiao Ran had just made for him. Old Kan had been taking photos of all kinds of young and handsome men for many years. He was used to seeing handsome men, but when he saw this, he couldn't help but curse in his heart. This was fucking cool. Chapter 9:18. They just needed to take a few more photos and put them on the cover. Pei Chi was trying to persuade Tang Yu to unbutton his collar when Old Kan's phone rang. It was Pei Huan's. Old Kan's expression softened and he answered the phone in a soft voice. Yes, I'm in Xingyuan. I'll pick you up later. He paused for a moment and said, come over and wait for me. Old Kan put away the phone and explained, Pei Huan happens to be nearby. I asked her to come over and we'll have dinner together later. He looked at Pei Chi and said that because of Tang Yu's special status, he didn't get a share. Xiao Ran was also there. Looking at his CEO's face, he laughed to himself. Then he went to the door to wait for Pei Huan. He felt very strange. Pei Huan used to have a very bad reputation. She was really a bad person, willful and selfish. Now she had turned over a new leaf and even got a man like Old Kansas. She was really lucky. Although Old Kan had been a playboy, men and women were different in this matter. It could only be said that the world was still fair to Pei Huan. Pei Huan came over quickly, followed by Xiao Mei. Pei Huan didn't know what scene she was filming. She was wearing a black evening gown and had exquisite makeup on her face. As soon as she came in, she complained, the dressing room is so bad today. I don't want to stay a minute longer. Xiao Ran could see that the relationship between Pei Chi and Pei Huan had thawed. He was about to take Pei Huan to the staff lounge to do her makeup when Old Kan stopped him. Wait a minute. Pei Huan exclaimed and walked over, her eyes sparkling with little red hearts. Old Kan knocked her on the head. What are you thinking about? He ordered her, sit over there. Pei Huan hesitated when she saw that it was Tang Yu's side, but Tang Yu didn't care. Pei Huan looked at Old Kan carefully. Not jealous anymore. Be serious and work. Old Kan gestured with his eyes, and Pei Huan sat down. She sat next to Tang Yu and leaned close to him. Her small hands were even holding Tang Yu's arm in a very photogenic manner. She rested her face on his shoulder and winked at Lao Kan provocatively. Is this okay? Lao Kan scolded her as if it was the first time she had patted her. What are you trying to do? Sell yourself. Pei Huan felt a little wronged, and there were no outsiders here, so she said softly, the one who sold herself was Pei Chi. The woman she was talking about was helping Tang Yu tidy up his trousers. She was half kneeling on the carpet, looking up at Tang Yu, and her eyes were a little blurred. She was also dressed in black today, but it was a very simple black t-shirt and jeans. Her hair was tied up in a ponytail, and she looked like the most ordinary and elegant waitress. However, Pei Huan sat beside Tang Yu, dressed in luxurious clothes, and had a resentful gaze, Tang Yu's eyes were fixed on Pei Chi, and he looked down at her. Old Can was full of passion and took a few photos. The sound of the shutter made Pei Huan look up. Pei Chi also wanted to turn around, but Tang Yu pressed her on his leg. Old Can took a few more photos. These photos had a special sense of a story, and they were not just stiff photos. He looked at the photos and put away the camera. Let's call it a day. Pei Huan ran over. That's it. Do I have money to take it? Old Can snorted. I'm willing to take photos of you, and you still want money. Pei Chi hit him when he was down. In the past, Old Can always took money from others when he took photos. Pei Huan understood for a while, and then she pulled Old Can's ear and said angrily, Can Mingzhu, you shameless old man. It was obvious that it was not a good thing. Old Can looked at his little disciple reproachfully. Chapter 9:19. Old Can had done a good job of keeping it a secret. When the one magazine came out, Pei Chi only saw the true face on the cover. That set of photos was shocking. There were 3 main characters, and they were very vivid. Her and Tang Yu's gazes were well captured, and their postures were a little ambiguous. Her hand was on Tang Yu's knee, and Tang Yu's body was slightly tilted towards her. Pei Huan also had a good grasp of the camera. Although she was hugging Tang Yu's arm, there was an inexplicable emptiness in her eyes, as if she was afraid, as if she was trying to hold on to something. The 3 of them always made people think of a lot of stories. Later readers had automatically replaced Pei Huan with Shen Lian, which was quite ironic when you thought about it. In the end, this group of magazines was not bundled together with Jiaren, because everyone agreed that this magazine was good enough to take the lead. In the early stages, the magazine's development department had won over several big-name sponsors, 2 of which were previously from Man magazine. They had leveraged Man, which had been founded by Shen Lian single-handedly. Of course, there was a lot of bloodshed in the process, but nothing could be changed. No one could stop the rise of one. The editor-in-chief had made up his mind. The circulation was twice that of the previous Jiaren magazine, but even so, it was still sold out within 2 days. The reason was that the cover and the inside pages were not inferior to the photos. In particular, this was Old Can's work, which was not easy to get. Now that it could be bought for 20 yuan a copy, who wouldn't want it? Not only that, because the first issue was Tang Yu, the elites of the business world were also proud of this magazine to increase their popularity. Young celebrities could only stare at it helplessly. And the biggest winner of this party was Pei Huan, who had unexpectedly become popular again. For a time, she was also pushed to the B-list in the entertainment industry. This was because she had shot a magazine with Tang Yu, which was very high status. Pei Huan had successfully cleared her name. The other female lead, Pei Chi, was a lot more mysterious. All the upper-class ladies could recognize that she was Tang Yu's ex-wife. Although his squatting posture made him look humble, the affection in Tang Yu's eyes was unmistakable. These 2 were still entangled. This was what Shen Lian couldn't stand the most. Wherever she went, one's existence was living in Pei Chi's shadow. She went to Xingyuan again to cause trouble with Tang Yu, but this time, she didn't even enter Xingyuan's gate. Shen Lian was very uneasy. She frantically dialed Tang Yu's number, but he did not answer. Later, she softened and sent him a message saying that it was her fault for going to the rose garden last time and begged him to forgive her. Finally, through Xiao Ran, he confirmed that Tang Yu would support him in the fashion ceremony next week. She knew that Pei Chi would also be there. At that time, she would ruthlessly crush Pei Chi and let Tang Yu know who was the most suitable woman for him. In the president's office of Xingyuan, Xiao Ran stood behind Tang Yu in silence. As the chief secretary, Xiao Ran knew far more than others. She was a little shocked about the current situation of Xingyuan. On the surface, it looked calm, but inside, it was already different. The top management and middle management had been transferred, and their whereabouts were unknown. Xiao Ran hesitated and said softly, "President, why do you indulge her like this?" She was referring to Shun Lian. Tang Yu had a small cigarette but burning on his fingertips and said indifferently, "It will end soon." He turned around and looked at Xiao Ran. Shun Lian owns 20% of Xing Yuan's shares. Xiao Ran was shocked. Chapter 920. Tang Yu smiled, "You should be able to tell. But this is far from the final result. Even if Xing Yuan is an empty shell, Shun Lian will still benefit from it." Xiao Ran was shocked. She couldn't believe that a noble man like him, who had always been in the clouds, would be willing to fall into the dust. Tang Yu was still smiling. What's wrong? He had everything he had since he was a child. Now, he just wanted to have Chi-Chi and their child. He knew that if he told Pei Chi-Chi about Xiaoxin's background, she would really lose her fighting spirit. Deep down in her bones, his Chi-Chi did not like to be a strong woman. She was more interested in photography. So, he could only cruelly whip her. Thinking of her, Tang Yu's lips curved into a gentle smile. Xiao Ran's heart also softened a lot. Does Chi-Chi know? Tang Yu grunted and turned around. At this moment, he looked a little tired. It seemed that he hadn't really rested for the past 2 years. Xiao Ran's eyes became hot. Tang Yu said calmly, "There's a draft on the table. Leak it to the media for me. Make it look good and don't let anyone find out." Xiao Ran's eyes fell on the table. She slowly walked over and picked it up. After a few glances, she was a little shocked. Was Tang Yu trying to kill Shun Lian? She looked up and hesitated. "Will this affect your reputation?" "That's not important," he said calmly. What he wanted to do was to make sure that Shun Lian couldn't hurt Chi-Chi. It had been half a month since he last saw Chi-Chi. He missed her very much, but for her safety, he endured it. Even if the whole world knew that he liked and loved her, he couldn't see her often. Occasionally, he would bump into her and see her carrying a camera and shuttling through the crowd. Occasionally, she would see him sitting in the car, and she would smile at him. However, he knew that she missed the child. She really wanted to know what the child looked like, where the child was, and whether the child was well. But when he said it wasn't safe, she really didn't ask anymore. In his heart, there was always an indescribable sadness and heartache. In the end, Tang Yu couldn't attend the fashion ceremony because of the company's business in the US. He flew to the US the day before, and Shun Lian couldn't do anything about it. However, she was very excited because Tang Yu was not here. She could deal with Pei Chi-Chi, the bitch. On Saturday night, the annual fashion ceremony was held at a star-rated resort. As early as a month ago, the resort had begun to clear the guests and prepare the venue. That night, the stars shone brightly, and many big shots came. What surprised Pei Chi-Chi the most was that Empress Yi had also come. It had been a long time since Yi Liangqiu had any works. She didn't have any arrangements in the beginning because the company was preparing for her to go abroad, and then she was shelved. But tonight, she appeared with Qin Anlin. The scene was boiling with excitement because of Empress Ye's arrival. The media chased after her, mainly asking about her schedule and future development. Yi Liangqiu stood next to Qin Anlin. Her makeup was perfect, and she said calmly, "I might be taking a break from the entertainment industry to spend some time with my family." The reporters were in an uproar. Qin Anlin's expression was also indifferent, as if he had already known about it. He didn't answer any of the reporters' questions. Chapter 921. Looking at Qin Anlin's attitude, Pei Chi-Chi knew that Yi Liangqiu still had some influence in King. Otherwise, Qin Anlin wouldn't have brought her to a public event without anyone knowing. However, she didn't know whether Shi Liangqiu or Qin Anlin would win in the end. She came with Lao Kansas. It was rare for Lao Kan to dress formally, and he was also shaved, so they looked very harmonious. Pei Chichi was wearing a pure blue evening gown with a one-shoulder design. It hugged her petite figure and slender waist well, especially the snow-white skin on her back. Her long hair was gently tied up, and around her neck was a dazzling diamond necklace. Old Kan had given it to her, saying that it was sponsored by a certain brand, but she would have to return it after using it. She held Lao Kan's arm and nodded when she saw Qin Anlin. Qin Anlin's gaze was unfathomable as he stared at her without saying a word. The atmosphere was a little awkward. Of course, Pei Chichi wouldn't stick her face to his cold shoulder, so she walked into the venue with Lao Kansas. Most of the people were already seated. She and Lao Kan were seated in the third row. After sitting down, she realized that Shen Lian was sitting not far away and was looking at her coldly. Similar to Shen Lian's mood, her gown was also black, with a hint of green in the green. Pei Chichi pretended that she didn't see anything and sat down with Lao Kan calmly. The staff were busy in front, and Su Mo was standing in the middle of the stage in a silver gown. She was checking her lines with the male host with a script in her hand. Her makeup was exquisite and flawless. Pei Chichi turned to look at Lao Kan and realized that he was also looking at Su Mo. She coughed and said, "If Pei Huan sees that look in your eyes, there will be a bloodbath." Lao Kan looked away and smiled. "I just feel that Su Mo is an ordinary woman. She would age too." No matter how well she took care of herself, there was still an aged look on her face. Old Kan wasn't sure if he was the same as most men, but he really liked the younger Pei Huan more. He liked her youthful and supple body, as well as her vitality. As he thought about this, he suddenly met Su Mo's gaze. In that instant, Lao Kan felt a little complicated. It was as if he had betrayed Su Mo. Su Mo knew how many women had come and gone over the years, but he had never felt this way. However, Pei Huan was different. He had fallen in love with her and wanted to marry her. The veins on Lao Kan's forehead bulged when he saw the resentment in Su Mo's eyes. Pei Chichi looked on coldly from the side. She had a bad feeling about this. Old Kan and Su Mo were exchanging flirtatious glances. What if Su Mo changed her mind at this critical juncture? Pei Huan wouldn't have anything to do with it, right? Pei Chichi thought to herself, but she didn't say anything. It was also at this time that Pei Huan also came over. She was wearing a smoky gray evening gown and looked quite classy. She was as classy as Heavenly Empress Yi. When she looked at Old Kan, her little face was tense and she didn't make a sound. Old Kan was a little unsure if she had seen something just now, but he didn't dare ask. He watched as she sat down next to Qin Anlin, with Empress Yi on either side. Anyone could tell that Pei Huan was the Empress. Chapter 922. Pei Huan was different. That photo was enough to prove that she wasn't just a vase. There was a story behind her eyes. Coupled with Empress Ye's cold shoulder, Pei Huan seemed to be in her prime again. She had taken on a few endorsements for second-tier brands and her net worth had skyrocketed. Pei Chichi looked at Lao Kan sympathetically and said in a low voice, "You might be in trouble." Lao Kan sat upright and didn't say a word. However, his gaze was no longer on Su Mo, but on Pei Huan. Pei Chichi looked at him for a while and changed the topic. She whispered into Lao Kan's ear, "I heard from Amy that man bribed the judges. They will be the winner of the media award this time. Do you have any news? Did you hear anything from the chief editor?" Lao Kan coughed lightly. "The Rising Star Award is definitely the one. No one can say anything about their influence, but it's hard to say for the media award. After all, one is backed by Jean Taihe, and Shen Lian is trying her best to compete with you. I think. Xian. Pei Chi smiled and didn't say anything else. The ceremony began and the lights dimmed, leaving only the lights on the stage. After flickering for a while, the lights came back on. Su Mo and the male host walked up from backstage together. She lifted the hem of her dress and looked elegant. Pei Chi looked at them and admitted that even Pei Huan might not be as determined as Su Mo if she cultivated for another 30 years. Su Mo had a wide network in the entertainment industry. Even someone like Qin Anlin would look up to her. Tonight's ceremony was divided into two areas. One was for entertainment figures, and the other was for fashion media. It was no surprise that Heavenly Empress Yi won the Power Star Award. This award was extremely valuable and was ranked according to the income of the celebrities. Heavenly Empress Yi had earned more than $1 billion in the previous year, far ahead of the runner-up. When she went up on stage to receive the award, there was a round of applause. As a diva, Yi Liangqiu had long been trained to keep her composure. She looked at the camera and smiled faintly. I would like to thank my employer, King Entertainment. I would like to thank my boss, Qin Anlin. I would also like to thank my manager, Sister Quan. I would also like to thank my fans for not giving up on me after all these years. She raised the trophy and smiled. Trust me, I'll be back soon. There was a touch of indifference and calmness on her face. It was definitely not something that those popular young stars could compare to. The loyal fans were screaming, Yi Liangqiu, Yi Liangqiu. Yi Liangqiu waved at them and left the backstage. She had the demeanor of a heavenly queen. As Qin Anlin sat, his assistant, Kemi, whispered, Sister Quan is really good at leading people. In just a few years, Yi Liangqiu has already mastered the invincible Vajra body. Although she said that she was being frozen, her attitude was so calm that no one could guess what she was thinking. Qin Anlin looked in the direction where she left. It was dark there. He smiled coldly. A person who has something to ask will not give up on everything that she has. The more indifferent Yi Liangqiu was, the more she couldn't let go of something in her heart. However, Qin Anlin didn't know what she wanted, and he didn't want to guess. Freezing her might make her confess a little. Kemi didn't say anything else. Because Yi Liangqiu wasn't someone he could casually talk about. She might be frozen today, but tomorrow, President Qin might pamper her again. At this moment, the atmosphere was at its climax. Those fans were sad because of Yi Liangqiu's temporary retreat. They even called out Yi Liangqiu's name hoarsely. It was very tragic. Chapter 923. Coincidentally, Su Mo had also signed up for the Most Influential Newcomer Award. To her surprise, it was Pei Huan. To her surprise, she had won the award based on a magazine cover without any other works. Pei Huan's popularity was bizarre. Because of that photo, many fans felt sorry for her and said that they owed Pei Huan a love story. This topic had been hyped up for a long time, but it was actually created by King Entertainment. Pei Huan was also a little shocked. She covered her lips with her fingernail polish and the 10-carat diamond ring on her finger was blinding. She blinked her tears away and went up on stage. She almost couldn't walk properly. She paused for a moment when she passed by Su Mo, but she quickly continued walking forward. She received the trophy from the guest presenter and looked down. Her voice was choked with emotion as she said, "Thank you to everyone who loves me and my fans. It was your support that allowed me to get to where I am today." Her nose was a little red and her voice was nasal. She even had to wipe the tears from her eyes. However, in Pei Chi's eyes, Pei Huan was more dazzling than ever before. This Pei Huan deserved everything beautiful, including old Can's love. Pei Huan started rambling. She looked at old Can below the stage and her gaze turned gentle. I think I've found my love. From now on, I'm no longer alone. Old Can looked at her. He actually felt proud of this good-for-nothing. Pei Huan walked a little too fast when she got off the stage and almost fell. Old Can almost rushed up to help her up. Fortunately, Pei Huan steadied herself in time. She winked at Old Can, and Old Can was instantly shocked. Su Mo was a little distracted as she watched the interaction between Pei Huan and Old Can. The male lead saved the day and saved himself from embarrassment. He signed up for the most influential newcomer media award. Theon. The male host was quite excited because the person receiving the award was Pei Chi from the magazine. Pei Chi smiled and went up on stage with her dress in a dignified manner. Old Can really wanted to hold Pei Huan up and watch how she walked. Pei Chi went up on stage and received the trophy. She smiled and said, "Thank you for your trust in us, the one. Thank you for one's trust. I believe that as media personnel, we will report more realistically with more positive energy. Thank you." The audience applauded, and Pei Chi got off the stage. Next, Su Mo reported for the Best Media Award. This was the most important award of the night. It meant that the media would have the most collaborations with celebrities next year, and it also meant the direction of the media's traffic. Shen Lian slightly raised her head. She had already opened up the top and the bottom. Jean Tai and the man below were determined to win. Su Mo looked at the list and paused for a moment. Then, she calmly reported, Jiaren magazine. As soon as the 4 words came out, the audience burst into applause. Shen Lian's face was ashen as she muttered, "How is this possible?" She ignored her manners and stood up. "Miss Su, I suspect that you have selfish motives and lied about the results." Su Mo lowered her eyes and looked straight into Shen Lian's eyes. Then, she smiled. "President Shen, are you suspecting me?" "Yes." Shen Lian said without hesitation. Su Mo lowered her eyes and smiled. "Why should I? Don't tell me President Shen knew the results beforehand." Shen Lian pursed her lips and didn't say a word. She secretly hated Su Mo. This woman was a demon, and an old demon at that. She was hard to deal with. Chapter 924. Su Mo smiled, looking very magnanimous. "If you're worried, you can go up and have a look." Shen Lian probably wouldn't do something like going up on stage directly, so she asked someone she could trust to go and have a look. That person went over to Su Mo and looked down with a troubled expression. Shen Lian's face darkened when she saw that. She had lost. She had lost to Pei Chi once again. Once again, she had lost face in front of everyone. Shen Lian flicked her sleeves and left. From that day onwards, she hated Su Mo. Su Mo sneered as she watched Shen Lian leave. "Little girl, how dare you fight with me? You're still too young." In fact, Shen Lian's dirty tricks had long been reported. In private, the judges had removed Man from the list of nominees, but Shen Lian didn't know about it. However, it wasn't because of the so-called fairness and justice. It was because there was a bigger boss than Shen Lian who didn't want Shen Lian to have an easy time. Frankly speaking, Su Mo had received $5 million in this shady deal. There was no other way. Behind these ostentatious things, there was cruelty. Everything could be bought with money. Just like Empress Ye's award. She had originally received news that she had been frozen, but King Entertainment had sent her 10 million yuan. Su Mo watched as Shen Lian left and smiled mockingly. She was just a little girl with a good family background. She didn't have much ability, so everything was too simple. the ceremony wouldn't be interrupted because of Shun Lian's incident. There were only some small awards after that, and they weren't that valuable. Since Jiren magazine had won this time, Pei Chi-Chi and Lao Ken would naturally stay to attend the reception. In the distance, Pei Huan was holding a glass and talking to a few investors. Lao Ken looked at her absent-mindedly. Pei Huan would occasionally glance over and exchange flirtatious glances. Pei Chi-Chi drank 2 glasses of fruit wine and her face was a little hot. She covered her face and said, "Lao Ken, isn't it too embarrassing for you to be naked like this?" Old Ken had grown a small beard and a sexy cyan chin. He finished the wine in his glass in one gulp, put the glass on the waiter's tray, and grinned. "Pei Chi-Chi, do you want to go home with us? I'm sure you'll be more embarrassed than you are now." Pei Chi-Chi felt that Lao Ken was already shameless enough in the past, but now he was several levels higher, just like Pei Huan's cup. Just as Lao Ken was thinking about how he was going to tear Pei Huan's gown, a gentle voice came from beside him, "Mingzhu." Old Ken froze for a moment. All these years, some people called him Old Ken, and some called him Ken Mingzhu, but only Su Mo called him Mingzhu, and that was many years ago. Old Ken's gaze was filled with nostalgia. He turned to look at Su Mo. She had already changed into a light green gown and had her breasts exposed. She looked intimidating. He remembered that he used to like to bury himself there, and she would hook her arms around his waist and say bad things about him. They would quarrel until the middle of the night, like 2 children, sometimes laughing, sometimes crying. What Old Ken and Su Mo had experienced wasn't something that Pei Huan could compare to. Even when Su Mo appeared in front of Old Ken wasn't indifferent. His eyebrows twitched as he looked at Su Mo, who was like a blooming lotus, looking 10 years younger. Pei Chi-Chi was a girl, so she naturally had a meticulous mind. Su Mo was dressed like this, and it was obvious that she was provoking Pei Huan. However, Pei Chi-Chi wouldn't expose her and had to be friendly. Love was important, and there was no room for mistakes. Since Pei Huan was so silly, she naturally had to help her. Chapter 925. Su Mo first looked at Lao Ken and saw a hint of amazement in his eyes. That was exactly what she wanted. Then, she shifted her gaze to Pei Chi-Chi. Su Mo's attitude towards Pei Chi-Chi was different. She was a white-bone demon in the workplace. How could she not sense the brewing storm? The reason why Pei Chi-Chi could have such a smooth journey was because he had Tang Yu behind him. Xing Yuan or Tang Yu support would allow Pei Chi-Chi to reach the peak of his life. This was something that not even several Jin Taihe could achieve. More importantly, Pei Chi-Chi was Lao Can's beloved disciple. Even if Lao Can stopped being with Pei Chi-Chi, she would still be his disciple. Su Mo could tell that Pei Chi-Chi's opinion was crucial to Lao Can's decision. Hence, she was especially polite to Pei Chi-Chi. Pei Chi-Chi returned a smile, but her nerves were tense. She looked at Pei Huan in the distance. "That idiot." Su Mo smiled and said, "Chi-Chi, can I talk to your master alone for a while?" Pei Chi-Chi nodded. "Of course." As she spoke, she gave Lao Can a meaningful look. Lao Can understood the meaning behind her gaze. Lao Can wasn't a blockhead. Besides, he knew Su Mo very well. It was better to talk about some things. It wasn't good to keep it bottled up. Lao Can and Su Mo walked to the balcony, which was hidden and dark. Pei Chi-Chi looked at it deeply. She heard the sound of high heels. It was Pei Huan. Pei Chi-Chi reached out to hold her and said in a low voice, "Are you going to make a scene with Lao Can?" Pei Huan gritted her teeth. "I knew that old woman was up to no good. Look at how she's dressed up. She's obviously trying to seduce Lao Kansas, since you know, why did you expose her?" Pei Chi tugged at her and only let her go after she had calmed down. You clearly know about their past, and you clearly know that Lao Can cares about Su Mo. Aren't you playing right into Su Mo's hands by throwing a tantrum? Pei Chi sneered, being smart is always something that needs to be highlighted. Pei Huan almost jumped up. Pei Chi, are you saying I'm stupid? Isn't that obvious? It's the truth. Pei Chi said. Pei Huan, think about it. What's your advantage over Su Mo? Pei Huan's expression was as if he had eaten digested food. He mumbled but couldn't say anything. Pei Chi continued, young and beautiful. Even if she's a little willful, she's still cute. This is the Su Mo you're talking about. No matter how much she pretends, she won't be able to do it because of her age. These words made Pei Huan's heart feel extremely comfortable and happy. Women are vain. Pei Chi quickly destroyed her confidence. But you're less mature and sophisticated than Su Mo. I think I'm pretty sophisticated too. Pei Huan mumbled unhappily. Pei Chi looked at her and smiled. If you go and argue with him now, you'll embarrass them like a shrew. Pei Huan, do you think you and Lao Ken will be done with each other given that he still has some feelings for Su Mo? Pei Huan's eyes widened. She couldn't be sure. After a while, she asked reluctantly, then are we going to let the adulterer and adulterer flirt there? Chapter 9:26. Pei Huan didn't understand. She felt sad when she saw Lao Can and the old woman together. However, she believed in Pei Chi. Chi said all that for her own good. So, she gritted her teeth and said, that bitch got lucky. Then, her expression changed again. She looked at Pei Chi with admiration and said, Chi, when did you become so cunning? You're amazing. Pei Chi snorted and drank a glass of fruit wine. She didn't notice that the wine was specially made and her face became hot after drinking it. She looked at Pei Huan and sneered, I remember you hated me since you were young and said that I was sinister. I won't dare to do it again. Pei Huan hugged her arm and looked at the balcony with daggers in her eyes. If Lao Can dares to let me down, I'll cripple him tonight. On the balcony, Old Can shuddered. He and Su Mo stood face to face, each holding a cocktail in their hands. The smoky gray gauze curtains blocked all prying eyes, giving the narrow space a romantic feel. Su Mo was dressed in light green, just like how she was when they first met. Old Can felt a little drunk, but he still managed to maintain a bit of sobriety. This sobriety was called Pei Huan. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the night of B City's suburbs was beautiful and quiet. Su Mo's face turned slightly red. She raised her head and looked at the man who looked rough on the outside, but was actually meticulous on the inside. Her eyes were mesmerized. Mingzhu, if I want to settle down, would that person be you? Lao Can's eyebrows twitched. Although he had already guessed Su Mo's intention, he still couldn't bear it when she said it out loud. Su Mo looked down. That moment of flirtatiousness was indeed not something a little girl like Pei Huan could compare with. She lowered her eyes and said in a hoarse voice, Mingzhu, after so many years, I don't believe that I'll lose to a little girl. She looked up at Lao Can with a hint of curiosity in her eyes. Do you love her? Are you with her as passionate as we are when we do it together? Is she able to satisfy your endless needs? Is she able to keep you up all night? Is she able to keep you up? She asked a lot of questions, but Old Ken was speechless. His black eyes stared at the woman he had loved for many years, the woman he had kept in his heart for many years. Su Mo was beautiful in the beginning, just like Pei Chi now. In the beginning, he treated Chi well because he saw Su Mo's shadow in her. However, he had always doted on her like a child. He didn't expect that he would fall into the hands of Pei Huan, a good-for-nothing girl of the same age as Pei Chi. Truth be told, Lao Can admired Su Mo from the bottom of his heart. After all, Pei Huan couldn't catch up to her even if he took a helicopter. However, he was intimidated by her confession of love. Su Mo, didn't you lose to Pei Huan? She's just a little girl and doesn't have any tricks up her sleeves. She only knows how to cry and throw a tantrum. It's just that she probably wants to kill me now that I'm talking to you here. As Lao Can spoke, his heart was as clear as a mirror. He knew what he wanted. It wasn't the meticulous Su Mo, the sophisticated Su Mo, or the best Su Mo, but the silly and bad-tempered Pei Huan. He had always wanted that innocence, and Su Mo couldn't give it to him anymore. Chapter 927. He nodded at Su Mo. I'm sorry, Su Mo. I don't want Pei Huan to be unhappy. That girl loves to cry and throw a tantrum. With that said, he strode out without turning back. He would never be reluctant to leave again. Su Mo looked at his back view and murmured, "Who said that Pei Huan doesn't have any tricks up her sleeve? Mingzhu, aren't you in love with her?" Su Mo chuckled and gulped down the wine in her glass. From now on, she was really alone. Old Can walked back to the banquet hall. Pei Chi was no longer there, and Pei Huan was the only one there. Pei Huan's eyes turned red when she saw Old Can, and she looked at him with tears in her eyes. Old Can's heart was filled with an indescribable tenderness. He reached out and patted her little head. "All right, let's go home." Pei Huan sniffled. Chi went to the washroom. "I'm going to wait for her." Old Can took out his phone from his pocket and dialed Xiao Mei's number, asking her to wait there. He hugged Pei Huan and left first. Pei Huan was still a little worried as she walked. Old Can said gruffly, "I won't lose her." However, Pei Chi was drunk. She splashed cold water on her face in the washroom, trying to cool down. No matter how hard she tried, her face was still hot. When she walked in the corridor, her head was still dizzy, and her legs were weak. The corridor was dim under the yellow light, and it felt warm on her body. Pei Chi couldn't walk anymore. She leaned against the wall and closed her eyes. Her petite body in the evening gown was trembling slightly, and she looked like she couldn't handle the alcohol. Suddenly, following a scorching aura, she was fiercely pressed against the wall. Pei Chi opened her eyes abruptly, and Qin Anlan's handsome face was right in front of her. He stared at her intensely, and the heat in his eyes seemed to be scalding her. Pei Chi's body was pressed against the wall behind her, and she looked into his eyes. She struggled with all her might, but she couldn't break free. She said angrily, "Qin Anlan, what are you doing?" Qin Anlan leaned forward and caressed her little face with his slender fingers. His voice was unbelievably hoarse. "Can Mingzhu and Pei Huan have already left?" Pei Chi pursed her lips. She had sobered up from her drunken stupor. She leaned back and said weakly, "Thank you, President Qin, for your reminder. I thought you would thank me for carrying you to the hospital last time," he said as his fingers moved to her lips. Her lips were red and slightly curled up as if she was waiting for a kiss. Qin Anlan was not a good man or woman. Now the girl in front of him was the girl he liked. Moreover, he was angry with her. This kind of anger was enough to burn a man's rationality. Qin Anlan narrowed his eyes and abruptly pulled her into his arms. When he sensed that she was trying to escape, he quickly grabbed one of her hands and forcefully pressed it down, and then pressed her against the wall. Pei Chi's head smashed into the wall with a loud thud, leaving her dazed. Qin Anlan's hot lips kissed her little mouth without a care. At the same time, he held both her little arms and raised them above her head, not giving her a chance to escape. When he kissed her, he sighed in satisfaction. However, it was still rough. His hot, thin lips touched her velvety little mouth. That feeling was like going to heaven. He became hurried and his breathing was also messy, as if he was unable to control himself like the young man in green. Not enough. Not enough. He wanted more. His body leaned forward even more, and he held both of her hands with one hand. He freed his other hand to pinch her sharp and beautiful chin and exerted a little force. Chapter 9:28. Pei Chi-Chi's head was dizzy, but she bit him instinctively. That strength was almost enough to bite him in half. Qin Anlin retreated, his gaze locked on her little face. Pei Chi-Chi was the same. Her breathing was messy, and her chest was heaving up and down violently from the struggle just now. Her hair hung hopelessly in a bun, looking indescribably seductive. Qin Anlin's heart was hard and soft at the same time. Although he had retreated, he did not let her go. He said in a low voice, "Why did you struggle? Pei Chi-Chi, you only love him, don't you?" There was a kind of Pei Liang in his tone. At such a night, anyone who heard it would feel sad. Pei Chi-Chi did not soften at all. She raised her head and said firmly, "Yes." Qin Anlin laughed. His body leaned forward, and his face was buried in her neck. His warm breath blew on her soft and cool skin, causing her to tremble slightly. His lips were right next to her ear, and he said in a low voice, "Pei Chi-Chi, do you believe that Tang Yu will still want you if I take you right here and now?" Her body froze. After a long time, she laughed softly, "Qin Anlin, if you think you're a beast, you can do it, but I'll call for help." A large palm suddenly covered her little mouth, forcefully covering it. She struggled for a long time, but couldn't say a single word. "Pei Chi-Chi, no one will come even if you scream to death." His gaze was a little sinister, and then he lowered his head and bit her thin shoulder forcefully. Pain, humiliation, and the smell of blood permeated the whole space. Pei Chi-Chi bit her lip hard, and she stared at the man in front of her. She bent her knee and pushed him. Qin Anlin let out a muffled groan. His whole body was pressed against her, and he did not move for a long time. Pei Chi-Chi was panting, and her body was pressed against him so she could not move anymore. At this moment, it was not that she was not afraid, but she was afraid of angering him further. It was not that she did not care. After a long time, Qin Anlin finally looked up. His gaze was complicated and unfathomable, and he stared at her for a long time. Pei Chi-Chi's body trembled slightly. His gaze first fell on her little face, then on her lips, her little neck, and her full and petite body. His gaze seemed to be on fire, as if he was patrolling and leaving his mark on her fair skin. Pei Chi-Chi shifted uneasily, and her voice was tense. "What you want?" Qin Anlin's voice was so low and hoarse that it sounded like sand scraping against paper. He asked the same question as before, "You only love him, don't you?" "Yes," Pei Chi-Chi said resolutely. "Qin Anlin, love is for a lifetime. Once I've loved him, I won't change it, unless he doesn't love me anymore." She did not want to give Qin Anlin hopeless hope, and she did not want to attract any trouble for herself. Qin Anlin suddenly let go of her and took 2 steps back. His gaze became cold, as if he was looking at a stranger. His thin lips even showed a hint of coldness. "Pei Chi-Chi, don't let me see you again." It turned out that in the end, he also wanted to take what he wanted. It turned out that she was not willing to give him what he wanted. This was such a disappointment. He had long decided not to touch love, but now, he had trapped himself in it. Chapter 9:29. Pei Chi-Chi leaned against the wall. Her hands and feet were weak, she was really frightened. She pulled up her clothes with difficulty, pursed her lips, and walked forward step by step. Qin Anlin was behind her and asked in a gloomy voice, "Pei Chi-Chi, your love is so firm and unwavering for a lifetime. What about Lin Jinrong?" Pei Chi stood in the circle of warm halo. Hearing his words, she was in a trance for a moment. After a long time, she turned around and looked into Qin Anlan's eyes. She said softly, "Jinrong is my best memory." Qin Anlan sneered, "What about me? Is it a nightmare?" She pursed her lips and didn't say anything. Qin Anlan's expression became more gloomy. "Pei Chi. Go away, the farther the better. Don't ever appear in front of me, or I don't know what I'll do." Pei Chi's eyes were filled with tears. She stared at him for a long time and suddenly picked up the hem of her dress and ran out. That touch of blue hurt Qin Anlan's eyes. She refused to belong to him after all. She would rather wait for Tang Yu forever. A gloomy female voice sounded beside him. "Anlan, now do you know the feeling of heartache?" Qin Anlan recognized that it was Shen Lian's voice. He didn't turn around but smiled faintly. "I thought you had left. Why? Are you still reluctant to leave? Do you think there will be a miracle?" Beside Shen Lian was Meng Qingqing, who hadn't appeared for a long time. She stood quietly beside Shen Lian without any expression. Qin Anlan turned around slowly. His eyes swept over Meng Qingqing's face and finally fell on Shen Lian's face. Shen Lian's face was almost distorted. The muscles on her cheeks were trembling and looked a little stiff. After a long time, she raised her chin. "Anlan, I think we should join forces." "Join forces? What should I do?" "To suppress Pei Chi." Qin Anlan chuckled, but his eyes were cold. "Shen Lian, when did you become so narrow-minded? Man is just a brand under Jin Taihe, just the tip of the iceberg. Are you going to fight against Pei Chi, vent your hatred, and ignore the interests of the whole group for your personal feelings?" Shen Lian sneered, "What am I afraid of? Other than Xing Yuan, Jin Taihe is the best in the industry." Qin Anlan's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Looks like jealousy has blinded your eyes. Do you know Boyi Corporation? If you haven't heard of it, go back and do it." Shen Lian didn't think so. "Qin Anlan, are you still reluctant to let her go? If we work together, Pei Chi will have nowhere to go. She will be yours." Qin Anlan lowered his eyebrows, stroked his exquisite cufflinks, and chuckled. "Shen Lian, I have to say that your IQ has regressed by 20 years. After that, he turned around and left without looking back. Shen Lian looked at his back, and the expression on her face became even more gloomy. Qin Anlan still couldn't bear to let that bitch go. He was still thinking about her. Wasn't liking someone the same as desperately trying to possess them. When she asked Meng Qingqing didn't say anything and just stood there quietly. Shen Lian turned around and looked at his handsome face. She had always known that he was good-looking and capable. He had been with her for so long, but he had never smiled. She knew that he liked Tang Xin. Chapter 930. Meng Qingqing was still expressionless. Shen Lian raised her eyebrows as she lost control of her emotions. She even believed herself. "Without Pei Chi, I would have donated my bone marrow to Tang Xin. That way, Tang Xin wouldn't have died. I like her very much. Tang Xin is also my little sister. Qingqing, it's all because of Pei Chi." She leaned against Meng Qingqing and even wanted to kiss his chin. Meng Qingqing pushed her away and said coldly, "President Shen, you're drunk." Shen Lian was stunned and her eyes were filled with hurt. She took a few steps back and almost fell. Because her feet were fake. She sneered, "Meng Qingqing, even you can't get over it, can you? What's there to get over a dead person?" She was almost hysterical. Meng Qingqing ignored her and turned to leave. "They're leaving one by one. You guys can go." Shen Lian's eyes were filled with sadness. Go. Go far away. One day, I'll make you regret it. Pei Chi lifted the hem of her dress and ran towards the entrance of the resort. She had received a call from Xiao Mei, who said that she was waiting for her at the entrance. Once she got out, she saw a familiar car. It was the one that she and Old Can came in. Without thinking, she opened the door and got in. However, the moment she sat in the car, she was pulled into the warm embrace of a man. Then, she heard a deep voice, "Old Xiao, drive." Old Xiao got the order and started the car slowly. In the back seat, Pei Chi was lying in Tang Yu's arms. She was confused for a long time. Didn't he go to America? Why was he back? I just got off the plane and came here. Tang Yu's voice was indifferent as he guessed her question. Pei Chi seemed to be in a dream. She replied with an "oh," and then looked up and asked, "Where are we going?" Tang Yu did not reply, as he could smell the faint scent of alcohol on her. He frowned. You drank. Originally, he was counting on Old Kansas. Obviously, Old Can, who was in love, was very unreliable. He almost lost Pei Chi. Look at him now, he had picked up a little drunk cat. Pei Chi was already mostly awake. At this time, in his arms, that warm breath, and that noble face made her a little dizzy. She bit her lips and couldn't say a word for a long time. Tang Yu hugged her and pressed one hand on her shoulder to stop her from moving. At the same time, he bent down slightly. His tall and slightly cool nose touched her little neck and then moved to her shoulder. He reached out, and a small light above the back seat lit up. He also saw the wound on her shoulder. It was a bite mark, and judging from the bite mark, it was obviously done by a man. Pei Chi looked uneasy. She bit her lips and looked at him. Who bit you? Tang Yu's voice was low and slow. His slender fingers gently stroked the wound. She didn't dare to lie and said honestly, Qin Anlin. Afraid that he would misunderstand, she quickly added, nothing happened. You've bitten me to this extent, and you're telling me nothing happened. Ha! He straightened her up and she sat in his arms in a shameful manner. Pei Chi was afraid that he would be angry, but after sitting in his arms like this, she was even more afraid that he would be angry. Tang Yu's voice was very low and husky. Chi, what do you think we should do? She let out an "ah" and was kissed by him. Tang Yu smelled the faint smell of smoke again, and his whole body froze. He believed that Chi wouldn't betray him and wouldn't like Qin Anlin. However, he was still angry because she had been molested by Qin Anlin. He wasn't angry at her, but at himself. Chapter 931. Pei Chi lay in Tang Yu's arms as he kissed her like that. The kiss was lingering, and there was a hint of anger that was hard to detect. He pried open her little mouth and swept all her senses. Pei Chi could only swallow and breathe along with his breathing. She felt as though she was being swept by the waves, being thrown higher and higher. Her body didn't feel like it belonged to her, and she felt as though she was losing speed. Her little hands could only cling on to him tightly, tugging on his jacket, forcefully pulling it into a long crease. Her little hands slid down and held onto it tightly, as though that would bring her some comfort. His kiss was very rough, and it even hurt her. Pei Chi struggled and shook her little head left and right, but she couldn't break free from him. It was just that this kiss became gentler. He kissed her little mouth longingly, as though he was comforting her for being rough with her just now. This gentleness made Pei Chi a little intoxicated. She was already drunk, and now, because of his kiss, it became a little more passionate. Pei Chi let out a soft moan of comfort, and her little hands moved up to hook onto his neck. Little naughty thing, what's the rush? He scolded her, and his big palm pressed down on her back, lifting her up a little. His thin lips moved downwards, trailing down her neck bit by bit. Just as Pei Chi was about to lose herself in the intoxication, a sharp pain came from her shoulder, and she was in pain as her body trembled tightly. Tang Yu. Her voice was sweet and soft, and there was a hint of grievance in it. It was so painful that her tears were about to fall. He only took a fierce bite, and then he licked and kissed her wound, as though he was a male beast healing a female beast. She sat in his arms, crying softly, and her little hands grabbed onto his shirt. Then she willfully wiped her tears and snot on his expensive suit to vent her anger. Tang Yu's voice was filled with helplessness and pampering. It was low and heavy, and it was especially alluring in such a night. Have you vented your anger now? He knew that if Chi-Chi wasn't willing, Qin Anlin's prideful personality wouldn't force her. However, he still scared her. There was no reason for him to be angry just now. Now that she was crying softly, his heart softened, and he was not in a hurry to do that. He reached out and wiped away her tears. All right, don't cry. She couldn't stop her tears, and her body trembled in his arms. He knew that she was actually scared out of her wits. He comforted her and said in a low voice, "It's my fault." He was too relaxed and neglected the fact that apart from Shen Lian, there was also Qin Anlin. Pei Chi buried her little face in his chest, her little hands secretly hugging his waist, and she nibbled on him. Actually, I'm scared. I'm afraid that I won't be whole anymore. I'm afraid that I won't have the courage to return to your side. Tang Yu's heart was wet. He reached out and touched her little head, saying nothing more. The black limousine sped through the night and finally stopped in front of a villa. The villa was brightly lit. Pei Chi looked outside and looked at Tang Yu inquiringly. Tang Yu smiled and pinched her little face. This is my mother and Zhao Yi's home. Little Zhao Yan has caught a cold, and they asked me to bring Xiaoxin to stay for a few days. Pei Chi-Chi's eyes widened, and she couldn't believe it. Wait for me in the car. Tang Yu ordered her lightly, opened the door, got out of the car, and walked towards the main villa. Chapter 932. She did not know why she was like this. She tried to calm herself down, but she could not. About 5 minutes later, Tang Yu walked out of the house with a small suitcase in one hand and Xiaoxin, who looked like a doll in the other. Xiaoxin's hair was longer than last time. It reached her shoulders. The only similarity was that her facial features were exquisite, and her big eyes were like stars in the sky. Tang Yu opened the car door and gestured for Pei Chi to carry the chubby little thing. He put the suitcase in the trunk and got into the car. Old Zhao asked hesitantly, "Sir, where are we going?" Tang Yu seemed to have thought about it. He replied calmly, "Xia City." Xia City. Pei Chi carried Xiaoxin and looked at Tang Yu with a puzzled expression. She said slowly, "You still have it?" He did not explain. He said calmly, "Yes, I got someone to clean it up a few days ago." Pei Chi was silent. She thought of Tang Xian. Tang Xian used to live there too. Seeing that she was silent and hugged Xiaoxin tighter, Tang Yu could more or less guess what she was thinking. He sighed, "Chi, it will get better." He knew that Tang Xian would always be a thorn in her heart. He could only accompany her and slowly heal her pain. Xiaoxin was in her arms. She looked at her beautiful sister and stretched out her little claws to grab her dress. Pei Chi was shocked. She grabbed Xiaoxin's hand to stop her from moving. If they were in the car, Xiaoxin. She would die of embarrassment if she did that. However, it was really comfortable to be hugged by a chubby little person. Pei Chi did not want to let go. She pinched her little face and then secretly pinched Xiaoxin's butt. It was so soft and bouncy. Xiaoxin cried out, "Sister, you're pinching my butt." She looked at her brother with an aggrieved voice. It was obvious what she meant. Even old Zhao, who was sitting in the front, laughed. Pei Chi was very embarrassed. Tang Yu, who was sitting beside them, seriously considered Xiaoxin's childish words. "Xiaoxin, can I also tug at Jijie?" Xiaoxin proudly agreed, then looked at Pei Chi with the expression in her eyes, "I didn't do it. It was Kuj." Pei Chi wailed as she was taught a lesson by Tang Yu. She turned her face away, a little embarrassed, a little angry, and a little jealousy. He liked the taste of Xiaoxin, because he only liked Xiaoxin. She looked at Pei Chi and then at Kuj. Her chubby little hand stretched out for Tang Yu to hug. "Kuj!" Tang Yu chuckled as he carried the little fellow over. "Pei Chi, look at you," he said in a low voice. She ignored him and kept looking out of the window. "You're even jealous of Xiaoxin." His slender fingers stroked her soft cheeks. His voice was as gentle as the night sky. Pei Chi turned around. "I'm not." Xiaoxin's big dark eyes stared straight at her, clearly saying, "You're lying." Pei Chi pretended to stare at her, then gave her a light slap on her butt. She then looked at Tang Yu provocatively. Tang Yu found it funny and infuriating. She was going against a little baby. So he said in a low voice, "Chi, I'll hit you after Xiaoxin falls asleep." Chapter 933. The car slowly drove into Xia City. Tang Yu said to Lao Zhao in a low voice, "Drive the car away and come over at 8:00 tomorrow night." Lao Zhao nodded and drove the car away. Tang Yu walked in front with the baby in one hand and the luggage in the other. Pei Chi followed behind him. She suddenly remembered, why was she so obedient? When he said this, she came here. She missed her child very much when she looked at Xiaoxin. Tang Yu handed Xiaoxin to her and opened the door of the apartment. As soon as he opened the door, Xiaoxin let out a cry. Even Pei Chi was stunned for a moment. Because the interior was not just cleaned as he said, but completely redecorated. The main color was warm and yellow, which made people feel warm. Moreover, from the living room, there was a soft white carpet, which was suitable for children to play at home. Sure enough, Xiaoxin wanted to come down as soon as she went in. She crawled on the ground until she reached a small house in the corner of the living room. Xiaoxin was still small, and there was a bed in the small house. She could still crawl in and lie down. Her little belly turned up and down, and her expression was indescribably happy. Pei Chi knelt beside her and watched. Her eyes were a little hot, and she looked up at Tang Yu. "Look at her, how happy she is." Even if she didn't say it, Tang Yu could guess what she was thinking. She missed her child. His gaze softened, and he looked at the adult and the child warmly. He felt that this life was enough. He also sat on the carpet and smiled. "Our children will also be this happy. But I haven't been with her." Pei Chi pursed her lips and looked up at Tang Yu. "Tang Yu, how long will it take?" He looked at her and said slowly after a while, "Very soon." He paused, and his voice became a little hoarse. "Chi, after this, Shen Lian will be sent abroad and will never come back." He watched her expression as he spoke. He knew that she was still brooding over Tang Xian's death and would never forgive Shen Lian. However, because of his agreement with Shen Zhongshan, he had no choice but to spare Shen Lian's life. He had his own difficulties, but he was afraid that she wouldn't understand. Pei Chi pursed her lips and said softly after a while, "I know." Undeniably, Tang Yu heaved a sigh of relief, but he was also a little sad in his heart. After all, he had barely kissed her. Pei Chi looked at Xiaoxin, who was about to fall asleep, and lowered her voice, Tang Yu, I'm not doing this for you, I'm doing this for myself. He looked at her with a deep gaze. He felt that his Chi-Chi was calmer than before. Pei Chi-Chi continued to speak in a low voice, I once felt that this world was very unfair to me. So, whether it was Zhou Meilin or Zhao Ku, I didn't give them any leeway. She slowly raised her eyes and looked at Tang Yu, I won't be so radical. There were some words that she couldn't say. That was, after all, Shen Lian was related to her by blood. It was enough to take back the original and let Shen Lian receive the punishment she deserved. Tang Yu stretched out his hand and stroked her hair. He didn't say anything, but his heart was soft. At such a soft moment, Pei Chi-Chi's voice was also soft. She whispered, Xiaoxin is asleep. The chubby little fellow was sleeping soundly with her little belly propped up. The night seemed to have become sweet. Chapter 934. Pei Chi-Chi said softly, Tang Yu, do you want me to carry her to the bedroom to sleep? Tang Yu nodded and smiled, children will always be children, they'll be sleepy so soon. He squatted down and carefully carried the chubby little fellow and walked towards the direction of the bedroom. Pei Chi-Chi looked in the direction where he was going and her eyes felt a little hot. Was Xiaoxin going to sleep with them tonight? She followed behind Tang Yu and walked into the bedroom that they used to live in. It felt much more spacious than before. There was still a photo of them on the bedside table. Pei Chi-Chi's eyes became even more hot. Tang Yu put Xiaoxin down and gently removed Xiaoxin's shoes and socks. The little lace stockings looked a little ridiculous in his large palms, but he couldn't be more serious as he did all of this. Pei Chi-Chi lay on one side and watched him take care of Xiaoxin, looking at Xiaoxin's delicate features. Her heart jumped violently. After a while, she looked up at him, and said slowly, Tang Yu, why do I feel that she looks very much like you? Moreover, she had seen Zhao Yi several times, but she could not find any trace of Zhao Yi on Xiaoxin's face. Moreover, Xiaoxin and little Zhao Yan were twins, but they did not look very similar. Tang Yu looked at her and smiled, she and little Zhao Yan are fraternal twins, so Xiaoxin is more like my mother's. It sounded very reasonable, but Pei Chi-Chi was still looking straight at Xiaoxin. Tang Yu carried her over. She was wearing a light blue gown and looked very beautiful on the snow-white bedsheet. She was shocked and wanted to struggle, but he had already turned over and kissed her. That kiss was filled with a sense of impatience. He kissed her deeply, and his big palms moved upwards, lifting up the light blue gown. Perhaps because Xiaoxin was lying next to her, Pei Chi-Chi was very nervous, and she had something on her mind. She tugged at his black hair and moaned softly, protesting, Tang Yu, I have something to ask you. But how could he let her continue asking? His Chi-Chi was so smart. If she continued to ask, the truth would be revealed. She still wanted to ask, but he did not give her a chance. He unbuttoned his jacket and threw it on the floor. Then, he grabbed her little hand and forced her to unbutton his shirt. Slowly, she was seduced by him. She lay on the bed and looked up at the handsome man above her. Lifting her arms, she hugged his waist and pressed her face against his chest. Tang Yu, be gentle. Chi-Chi, I know. His voice was unbelievably hoarse as he whispered into her ear. There was a warm atmosphere in the air that could be ignited with a single touch. When everything was honest, he worshipped her, praised how white and delicate her skin was, and murmured in a low voice how excited he was when he kissed her, when her whole body flushed pink. Pei Chi-Chi closed her eyes and her long eyelashes trembled slightly. Her delicate red lips were alluring and slightly parted, as if she was waiting for a kiss. Tang Yu kissed her little mouth and said in a low voice, Chi-Chi, I'm going to start. She kicked him in annoyance. He knew that she was anxious and laughed softly. His lips slowly moved downwards, ready to enjoy the delicious food. At this moment, the little person lying next to him turned over. A pair of grape-like eyes were as bright as two 20V light bulbs in the dim light. Then, Xiaoxin performed a quick crawl. Her plump little body crawled over and snatched the delicious food from Tang Yu's mouth in one bite. Chapter 935. Xiaoxin was not fully awake. She closed her eyes as she took deep breaths. There was an indescribable satisfaction on her little face. Her chubby little hands were also hugging her little milk bottle. Her pinkish little nails were slightly digging in. It was an indescribable adorable sight. But in Tang Yu's eyes, it was an indescribable dissatisfaction. Yu Wang, who had been interrupted, was in pain. He stared at her for a while, then turned to the side. After a while, he said in a low voice, "Coax her to sleep, I'm going to take a shower." As he said this, he got up. Pei Chichi felt uncomfortable being eaten by Xiaoxin. She hurriedly called out to him. Tang Yu turned around, and his eyes seemed to be on fire. She was lying in the middle of a sea of light blue. She looked so tender, and Xiaoxin was wearing a pink one-piece pajamas, lying on top of her, eating with all her might. That scene made his eyes hurt, and a certain part of his body hurt even more. There was a touch of tears in Pei Chichi's eyes. She looked at him pitifully and said in a small voice, "Tang Yu, what should I do?" He smiled and turned around again. He bent down and kissed her forehead. "I'll feed you when Xiaoxin falls asleep." His gaze was a little deep, and then he walked into the bathroom. Pei Chichi lay there lifelessly. She looked at the chandelier above her head, and then lowered her head to look at the little fellow in her arms. Her heart softened when she saw it. Xiaoxin used all her strength, and her little body was covered with a thin layer of sweat. She pitifully sucked with all her might, but she was not able to eat. Pei Chichi turned around and patted the little fellow. It was actually a little painful, but she could not bear to put it down. Once she put it down, the little fellow would wake up. When Tang Yu came out of the bathroom, she looked at him pitifully. "Does she want to drink milk? Why don't we make some milk powder?" Tang Yu's gaze was a little unfathomable, and then he nodded. "I'll go see if she has it in her little bag." After a while, he took the milk bottle and poured some milk powder into the room. He lay on his side in only his bathrobe. He carried little Xinshin away and stuffed the milk bottle into her mouth. The fat little guy smelled the fragrance of the milk and hurriedly took a few breaths. Then, he sighed in satisfaction. His little face was calm and serene. After that, he wasn't in such a hurry anymore. He would drink 2 mouthfuls whenever he thought of it, sleep twice, and drink twice. Pei Chichi looked on enviously. She leaned on the side and said in a low voice, "She's so cute." Tang Yu's gaze also landed on the little baby. When he heard that, he looked up at Pei Chichi. His gaze deepened and he spoke very slowly, "Pei Chichi, it's not as loving as you." Pei Chichi's heart tightened. He gently carried her and walked towards the bathroom. "Be careful." She bit her lips and hugged his neck. Tang Yu nimbly closed the bathroom door, turned on the shower, and pressed her against the wall. The warm water turned into a drizzle and fell on her body, lingering. He lowered his head and kissed her little mouth, not giving her a chance to speak again. After a long time, he looked up at her. His dark eyes were clear and bright, and there was an unconcealable desire in them. Tang Yu's fingers caressed her red lips as he whispered into her ear, "Chichi, keep your voice down later." His voice was hoarse beyond belief. She looked at him, unable to control her emotions. He laughed softly. "Otherwise, you'll wake up little Xinshin." Chapter 936. Tang Yu's body froze for a moment. His muscles bulged, strong and penetrating. He lowered his head and searched for her little mouth. His voice was low and hoarse. Chi-Chi, you have to find the answer yourself. Pei Chi-Chi was stunned for a moment, and then she cried softly. Xiaoxin was outside, so she did not dare to make a loud noise. She only dared to cry softly. This bastard. Her little hand hit his shoulder. She was still angry. She hit him hard, and her voice was a little hoarse from crying. But Tang Yu did not let her go because of her crying. Perhaps because of Xiaoxin's existence, some things were exposed by her, so she was particularly excited. It had been a long time since she was like this. It was only when they reunited that it was so intense. Chi-Chi. He kissed her little mouth and murmured, "Now, treat her as your sister, okay?" Pei Chi-Chi cried. She was treated like this by him. Soon, she lost her strength. She hung softly on his neck, still crying. Her little hand sank deep into his flesh. She was still angry, so she deliberately scratched and scratched him. She wanted to look at Xiaoxin, because his answer was already very obvious. That was their daughter. Before she was born, she had already thought of a name for the little girl. Xiaoxin was their Tang Tang. Her heart was stirred up and soft, but the more she was like this, the more excited Tang Yu was. He tortured her for a full hour before he reluctantly let her go. He washed her, wrapped her up, and put her next to Xiaoxin. When her father took the bottle away, the little fellow was stuffed into her arms. He did not say anything, but his attitude was enough to explain everything. Pei Chi-Chi was almost trembling as she held the little fatty. Until now, she still could not believe it. She asked him more than once, "Is this really our child?" Tang Yu was a little regretful. He should not have let her know so soon. She was jealous before, but now he was jealous. Now, there was not a shadow of him in Pei Chi-Chi's eyes. Even when they made love just now, she was obviously not focused. Tang Yu straightened his body, snorted softly, and did not answer. Pei Chi-Chi looked at him for a few seconds, then at Xiaoxin's little face. After a while, she said softly, "I know who she is." Sleep. His tone was not very good. He reached out and swept the big and the small into his arms, threatening, "If you speak again, I will carry you to the bathroom again." He was so fierce, but Pei Chi-Chi was not afraid of him at all. At this moment, her heart was unbelievably soft. She was a mother. Be careful of your mother. He lowered his head and kissed the little guy in his arms. He didn't sleep the whole night. That night, Shen Lian was also awake. Shen Lian had been attacked by Su Mo and Qin Anlin at the fashion ceremony tonight. When she got home, her secretary called and said anxiously, "President Shen, look at the news." Shen Lian put down the cup in her hand, turned on the news, and saw the latest news. A rape case had been cracked in B City, and the main culprit was someone Shen Lian would never forget. Because that man had once raped her in a dark street corner. That mouth of yellow teeth, that unpleasant smell, was still rotting in her heart until now. The main culprit looked at the camera, showing his yellow teeth, and said with some pride, "Among the women I raped, there was also a woman with the surname Shin, the boss of a big company called Jean Taiha." Chapter 937. Shen Lian looked at the television screen, her body cold. How did that person get caught? But, indeed, it was that man. That night was like a nightmare. She would never forget it even in death. The news was still playing, but Shen Lian had already been beaten back to hell. She looked at it in a daze, her eyes filled with viciousness. She had to seal that man's mouth. She couldn't let Tang Yu see that she had been raped by such a disgusting man. She couldn't, at the same time, there was another matter that dealt a heavy blow to Xin Lian. The next morning, Xing Yuan's shares fell by 10%. It was like a waterfall, catching everyone off guard. How was that possible? Xin Lian held 20% of Xing Yuan's shares. She wouldn't care about this. For the past 2 years, she had been so calm and indifferent when torturing Jean Taihe. It was because she held 20% of Xing Yuan's shares. This 20% was worth more than Jean Taihe. What was she afraid of? But now, she was really afraid. Pei Chichi was back, and the fact that she had been raped was exposed. Xing Yuan was in danger. At this moment, she couldn't wait to find out about Xing Yuan's situation. Xin Lian dialed Tang Yu's phone like crazy, but it was turned off. She then dialed Xiao Ran's number. Xiao Ran calmly told her that Tang Yu was in America and would talk to her when he came back. That day, Xin Lian seemed to have gone crazy. Suddenly, she thought of Meng Qingqing. He must have a solution. He must know a lot. He knew Tang Yu so well. He knew Xing Yuan so well, but Meng Qingqing calmly told her that he didn't know. It should be an internal problem in Xing Yuan. After hanging up, Xin Lian felt like her head was about to explode. The 20% in her hands had always been her last bargaining chip, the key to restraining Tang Yu. But now, even this was in danger. Early in the morning, Xin Lian began to soak in alcohol. She didn't care that the alcohol would cause her broken leg great pain. She just wanted to be drunk in the alcohol, and it would be best if she didn't stay sober. She was so drunk that she lay on the bed and called her attending doctor, Dr. Zhang. "You're the only one who cares about my life and death, right?" Xin Lian cried bitterly, like a dying person grasping at the last straw. To her, Zhang Heng was the last straw. He was also the person she could vent her anger on whenever she wanted. He would always be nice to her and would always let her do whatever she wanted. She would never be as crazy as everyone else looked at her. The moment she called him, he immediately came over. The living room of the villa was filled with wine bottles, but there was not a single servant in the house. They were probably hiding. Dr. Zhang helped the semi-conscious Xin Lian up and examined her. He was sure that she was only drunk. After thinking about it, he carried her upstairs to the bedroom and carefully placed her on the bed. He squatted down and helped her remove her prosthetic leg. He was a doctor and had long been used to the deformities of his patients. But when he removed Xin Lian's broken leg, he still felt a little regretful. Chapter 938. Xin Lian woke up slowly. As soon as she opened her eyes, she saw a man in a white shirt taking care of her with his head lowered. Her vision was blurry. In a trance, it seemed that Tang Yu was there. When they were young, he would take care of her like this when she had a fever and refused to listen to him. It was so beautiful at that time. Xin Lian's voice was a little hoarse. "Tang Yu, is that you?" The man froze for a moment. He lifted his head and looked at her. He wasn't. He was just her doctor. However, Xin Lian was still in a trance. She lay up straight and her voice was still gentle. "Tang Yu, I know you won't be so heartless. You like me, don't you? You only have lust for Pei Chichi, don't you?" She sat up and took off her dress. Her eyes were like water. "I can give you what she can give you." In the morning light, her gaze was pure and her body was fair and beautiful. Her deformity was like a Venus with a broken arm. Zhang Hengyuan was a man. He was a man who had kept his chastity for many years. At this moment, she treated him as a substitute. Although he was a little annoyed, he still couldn't reject it. From that night onwards, he remembered her appearance. Her body was the most beautiful he had ever seen. But when he saw her again, she was lying there, and he had made her deformity with his own hands. When the masculine body covered that fair side, the floor-to-ceiling curtains were lowered slowly. The room was dark and it was absurd. Everything was calm. Shen Lian's gaze fell on the ceiling. She was in a daze. At this moment, she had already sobered up. She knew that the person lying beside her was not Tang Yu, but her attending doctor. She pursed her lips and said in a tense voice, "Get out." Zhang Hingyuan calmed down and got off the bed to put on his clothes. Shen Lian wanted to prop up her body. She only moved a little. Her head was lowered and she let out a hoarse cry, "Why did you step on my foot?" Her eyes were wide open, staring at Zhang Hingyuan. Zhang Hingyuan was embarrassed. As a doctor, he had come to take care of a female patient, but he had slept with a female patient in her house. Facing such accusations, he smiled bitterly. "You'll feel better this way. I don't want to be comfortable. Do you hear me? Don't touch my feet so casually in the future." Shen Lian was hysterical. She narrowed her eyes and glared at the gentleman in front of her. Suddenly, she smiled strangely. "I'm going to sue you. I'm going to ruin your reputation." Zhang Hingyuan finished buttoning his shirt. His fingers paused for a moment, and he turned around to look at her. After a long time, his voice was very soft. "All right." It was against his professional ethics to be with her, so it was good for her to go and mess around. Shen Lian was stunned. She did not dare to believe her ears. He actually didn't care. Zhang Hingyuan was already dressed. He stood at the head of the bed and looked at the mess on the bed and Shen Lian. "I'll resign on my own. If you're willing to let me write down the reason, I can explain it to you." He liked her, but it did not mean that he could let her trample on him. Shen Lian was still in a daze, but Zhang Hingyuan had already left. He left very quickly. In the afternoon, he called and calmly told her that he had already resigned and would not be her attending doctor anymore. Shen Lian was still lying on her princess-like bed, holding her phone in a daze. Her legs were very weak, as if the last bit of energy had been sucked out of her body. She looked at her phone in a daze. She looked at the last person beside her leaving her. After such a long time, she actually knew that she was relying on his love for her. Chapter 939. Xia City. Pei Qiqi was browsing the news on her phone. She turned her face away. "Tang Yu, aren't you anxious?" "Why should I be anxious?" Tang Yu lay down and placed Xiaoxin on his lower abdomen, letting the little girl play on it. Pei Qiqi moved her face to his lower abdomen. "Aren't you afraid that she will panic and sell it out? Who will take over at this moment?" Tang Yu smiled. "Besides, based on my understanding of Shen Lian, she won't give up easily. She won't let go until the last moment." Pei Qiqi tugged him hard with her little hand and snorted. "You know her very well." Tang Yu lowered his head to look at his little heart, then slowly said, "Only the temperament." "Oh. If I understand my body, I probably won't be involved." Pei Qiqi lowered her eyes. Her voice was soft and there was some emotion in it. Tang Yu sighed. "Qiqi, these ifs don't exist. I know, I just don't want you to be too comfortable," she said straightforwardly. Her expression was a little mischievous. Tang Yu glared at her and then patted Xiaoxin's little head. "Your mother has been led astray by Lao Kan's dad will forgive her and educate her again." Xiaoxin nibbled on her little finger and said vaguely, "Yes, sister." Pei Qiqi and her mother stared at each other. "Mom. Sister." Xiaoxin was very persistent. Pei Qiqi pouted and pinched Tang Yu hard. "It's all your fault. If he hadn't raised Xiaoxin with his mother, why would Xiaoxin call him sister?" How could he correct it in the future? Tang Yu looked at her and couldn't help but smile. He reached out and pinched her little face. Chi-Chi, actually, it's not wrong for Xiaoxin to call me that. He paused and coughed. Didn't you call me Dad before? Pei Chi-Chi widened her eyes and glared at him. He was really shameless. Xiaoxin laid on Tang Yu's lower abdomen and happily called out to Kuj, giggling. When Kuj picked up the little fatty, he said, "Brush your teeth, Kuj will make breakfast for you." Pei Chi-Chi called him a pervert. Before Tang Yu entered the restroom, he leaned over and kissed her, murmuring, "Pei Chi-Chi, I'm only a pervert to you." She blushed and rolled over to show her disgust. After a while, he heard sounds coming from the bathroom. After a while, two people, one big and one small, came out. Although she despised him for being a pervert, Pei Chi-Chi wished that he could be with Xiaoxin 24 hours a day. So she quickly got up to wash her face and walked out to the dining room. Through the glass, she saw Tang Yu making breakfast with Xiaoxin. He was wearing a pair of beige trousers and a white sweater. He looked very homely, while Xiaoxin was still wearing an idyllic dress. The princess dress with small floral patterns was particularly cute, especially when she was a little fatty. Xiaoxin was placed on the counter, watching Tang Yu making sandwiches. At this height, it was convenient for her to hug Kuj from time to time, and Xiaoxin would giggle from time to time. Pei Chi-Chi stood at the door for a while, feeling a sense of unreality. Tang Yu looked up at her and quietly looked at her for a while. "Come sit and wait." She didn't move, so he directly walked over and picked her up with one hand. Pei Chi-Chi thought that he would carry her to the chair, but she really underestimated his shamelessness. Tang Yu directly carried her to the counter and sat next to Xiaoxin. Chapter 940. Pei Chi-Chi cursed inwardly as she glared at Tang Yu. There was no such thing as the most shameless, only more shameless. Tang Yu enjoyed her glare to the fullest. He continued to make breakfast happily, while Xiaoxin added, "Sister, you are so fierce. Don't bully Kuj." Pei Chi-Chi bit her lip. "It was you, Kuj, who bullied me." She felt that she was going to lose her mind when she thought about it. Fortunately, Tang Yu's cooking skills had improved a lot in the past 2 years, which comforted her. He brought a Western-style breakfast to Xiaoxin and made Chinese-style breakfast for Pei Chi-Chi. He even fried the fried dough sticks very well. Pei Chi-Chi ate a small mouthful of millet porridge and nibbled on the fried dough sticks, which tasted particularly good and authentic. She narrowed her eyes in satisfaction and even hummed comfortably. Tang Yu was used to a Western-style breakfast, which was inherited from him. He took a sip of milk, looked at Pei Chi-Chi, and smiled gently. "Chi-Chi, I said that I will feed you until you are full." There was a certain meaning in his tone. Pei Chi-Chi almost choked. She stared at him with tears in her eyes, looking very pitiful. Xiaoxin looked at this and that, unable to understand. Tang Yu chuckled, patting one head, then the other. Just as he was about to speak, the phone in his pocket rang. He took it out and saw that it was from Pei Huan. He glanced at Pei Chi-Chi, smiled, and picked up the phone. He walked to the living room to answer it. He had a hunch that what Pei Huan said next would not be very pleasant. Sure enough, when he walked to the window of the living room, Pei Huan's voice was heard, extremely loud. "Tang Yu, you bastard. Why did my shares in the Pei Group become 5%? Pei Huan was only wearing a camisole, walking back and forth by the bed, dazzling Lao Can's eyes. Old Can smoked a cigarette and looked a little impatient. He patted the seat beside him and gestured for Pei Huan to hurry up. Pei Huan directly cursed at Lao Can's. Lao Can lifted the quilt and went to the bathroom. "Tang, can you explain it to me?" Pei Huan roared. I'm so angry, so angry. Tang Yu looked at the morning sun outside and rubbed his forehead with one hand. He explained with difficulty, if I said that the pay group's assets have already increased by 1,000 times, would you believe it? Hee, Tang Yu, what nonsense are you talking about? Do you think I'm easy to fool? Pei Huan still wanted to curse, but he immediately shut his mouth, as if he had thought of something. She thought of her annual dividends, hundreds of millions. It would be impossible for a small family like the Pei family to have it. She held her breath and did not make a sound for a long time. Tang Yu paused for a moment. Do you understand now? Pei Huan's temperament was much better than before. She was no longer the kind of person who would take advantage of others. Most importantly, she was not born to be a businessman, so it was good to have money. Tang Yu turned his head and looked at Pei Chi on the other side. His eyes warmed up. Chi will explain to you. Pei Huan was surprised. Chi. The phone had been hung up. She looked at the phone with a displeased expression. What? I'm hanging up. No matter what Tang Yu said, as long as Chi knew, it was right. Pei Huan solved the problem in her heart, breathed a sigh of relief, and immediately ran to the bathroom to see the beautiful man out of the shower. Lao Can had already finished showering and was wrapped in a bath towel. He looked at her and said, I thought you only cared about money. Pei Huan drooled and knelt in front of him. She untied the bath towel around his waist and said in a childish voice, I also care about this. Chapter 941. On the other side, Tang Yu hung up the phone. When he turned around, he saw Pei Chi standing behind him. Obviously, she had heard it. He smiled but did not explain. You deliberately let Pei Huan know, didn't you? Pei Chi asked softly. Tang Yu hesitated for a moment before replying, sort of. He thought for a while and decided to tell her. Last night, I got someone to release some news. Today, Xingyuan's stock price dropped by 10%. I think Shen Lian must have heard about this news. Also, he placed his hand gently on her shoulder and smiled faintly. Chi, there will be no more Xingyuan in the future. There will only be Boyi. Boyi was a subsidiary of the Pei Corporation. Of course, Pei Chi owned 90% of the shares and could separate from Boyi at any time. But now was not the time to think about this. The most important thing now was for Boyi to acquire Xingyuan. Xingyuan's fixed assets were very large. Tang Yu naturally would not let Shen Lian take advantage of it. Moreover, there were also internal conflicts in Jin Taihe. Pei Chi lowered her eyes and looked up again. There was a trace of haziness in her eyes. After a long time, she said softly, Tang Yu, if I had a choice, I would not want to be involved in the business world again. She liked her current career, liked to partner with Lao Can, liked to go out and collect stories, and even liked being pressured by the managing editor. How could Tang Yu not know that? He reached out and touched her little face gently. I know. But there were some things that he could not do personally. Given the current relationship between him and Pei Chi, it was the right time to complete this task. He held her in his arms and let her little face rest on his shoulder. He hugged her just like that. Little Xiaoxin wobbled over and hugged Pei Chi's leg with her chubby little hands. She called her sister. Pei Chi looked up at Tang Yu and smiled at him. She said softly, she's so cute. Yes, because our Chi gave birth to him. He smiled and kissed her forehead. His voice was a little hoarse. I have to send you back in the afternoon. He didn't explain much, but Pei Chi knew that it was risky for them to meet like this, especially Xiaoxin, which couldn't be exposed. She buried her face in his chest and said in a soft voice, after this is over, let's find a quiet place and have a good vacation. We won't see anyone and we won't care about anything, okay? Tang Yu nodded. Okay. She lowered her head to look at Xiaoxin again. The child who was less than 2 weeks old was actually still very young. Xiaoxin was especially playful, just like the little people in the cartoon. Looking at Xiaoxin, her heart softened. She said in a low voice, Tang Yu, thank you for taking care of Xiaoxin so well. Even if he didn't say it, she knew that a 7-month-old premature baby could be taken care of so well. Tang Yu could see the sadness in her heart. He stroked her fluffy little head and said in a low voice, if you want to thank someone, thank my mother. But I think she would be more willing for you to take good care of her son. Pei Chi looked at him. In the end, he was just trying to get some benefits for himself. But even so, they had reunited after a long time and had a baby like Xiaoxin. Everything was so wonderful. Chapter 942. Good times always passed. In the evening, Tang Yu first sent Xiaoxin to his mother's place. Pei Chi was very reluctant, but she and Tang Yu couldn't take the risk with Shen Lian being so crazy. They could only live together after everything had passed. Pei Chi didn't go in with Tang Yu, afraid that she would feel uncomfortable. Tang Yu came out, opened the car door, and closed it. He fastened his seatbelt and looked at her in the rearview mirror. He said slowly, Mom asked you just now. Pei Chi's heart skipped a beat. Even now, she was still afraid of Lin Yun. It was probably the after effect of Zhao Ke's incident. She said, oh, and then secretly looked at Tang Yu's reaction. She said, why didn't Chi go in? Tang Yu said indifferently, then reached out to adjust the rearview mirror. Their eyes met in the mirror, and Pei Chi saw the smile in his eyes, with a little bit of clarity. He did it on purpose. Pei Chi pouted and didn't say anything. She didn't want him to have his way. Tang Yu smiled and adjusted the rearview mirror again. His face was gentle and noble. She had to admit that he was very good-looking. Even when she hated him the most, she would be seduced by him. The car started again, and it was already dark when he dropped her off at the apartment. He didn't let her get out immediately, but locked the door. Pei Chi cried out and lay behind his seat. She put her arms around his neck and said coquettishly, I'm going back. He didn't move. After a while, he asked her in a low voice, Chi, aren't you going to invite me in? She didn't want to. She didn't say anything, so he chuckled. He turned his body and reached out to stroke her hair. His tone couldn't be more serious. Chi, I'll ask Lao Can to protect you. There will also be bodyguards following you. He couldn't bear the slightest bit of danger. There was nothing foolproof, and he didn't dare to let her take the risk. What about you? Her voice was nasal, like a little sheep asking him. Tang Yu pretended not to know. What about me? I'm afraid that you'll be eaten by the demoness. Pei Chi simply leaned over and looked up at him softly. At this moment, it was as if he had returned to the past, as if the pain of the past 2 years did not exist. Tang Yu knew that it was because of his little heart. It was his careful heart that healed the wound in her heart and made her let down her guard against him. He smiled and patted her little face. Didn't I get a vasectomy? He was still playing dumb. Even though she knew he was teasing her, she still couldn't help but say, no. His eyes were clear and bright. This was the moment when a mature man was at his most charming. Pei Chi leaned forward and bit his ear. Isn't it still functional in that aspect? After saying that, her little face quietly blushed. No matter what, she was still a 22 or 23-year-old girl. When she said something like that, she would naturally blush. Tang Yu looked at her with his clear eyes and said in a low voice, Pei Chi, do you think that compared to the past? I'm not that bad now, right? Why did such a sensitive question come out when they said goodbye? Pei-Chi bit her little finger and looked at him with a seductive gaze. Not only was it not bad, it was even better than before. Tang Yu didn't say anything. Looking at her blushing face, he reached out and touched it gently for a while. His gaze was deep and unfathomable. No matter how reluctant he was, they still had to part ways temporarily. When they met again, she was the CEO of Pei Enterprises, the biggest shareholder of Boyi, and someone who could go against Xingyuan Corporation. You're tuning in to the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.